The German General Staff had every reason to feel confident about their infantry's capabilities in 1914. Their soldiers carried the Gewehr 98, a masterpiece of engineering that could place rounds accurately at distances exceeding 1,000 meters. German military doctrine emphasized precision shooting, each soldier trained to make every cartridge count, delivering carefully aimed fire that would methodically dismantle enemy formations. The rifle itself reinforced this philosophy. Its front-locking bolt system provided exceptional accuracy, and German marksmen regularly demonstrated their prowess at ranges British doctrine considered impractical for infantry engagement. British rifle training, by contrast, struck German observers as hopelessly outdated. Reports from military attachés who'd observed British Army exercises consistently noted the emphasis on rapid fire at relatively close ranges. To German eyes, this looked like desperation, a tactical admission that British soldiers couldn't match continental standards for marksmanship. Why else would they prioritize speed over accuracy? The German military press occasionally published dismissive articles about British musketry training, suggesting it belonged to an earlier era of warfare when massed volleys might compensate for poor individual skill. The numbers seemed to support German confidence. The Gewehr 98's 5-round internal magazine, loaded via stripper clips, represented the standard for modern military rifles. Most continental powers had adopted similar designs. The German rifle's 7.92mm cartridge delivered superior ballistic performance to the British .303 round, particularly at extended ranges. German infantrymen trained to engage targets methodically, taking time to ensure hits rather than wasting ammunition on suppressive fire. This approach aligned perfectly with prevailing military theory that emphasized controlled, disciplined fire. British doctrine seemed almost contradictory to German analysts. The short magazine Lee-Enfield carried 10 rounds in its magazine, excessive, surely, for soldiers who were supposedly trained marksmen. The British emphasis on firing 15 aimed shots per minute struck German observers as physically implausible for sustained combat. Anyone who'd actually fired rifles under field conditions knew that maintaining such rates whilst ensuring accuracy was extraordinarily difficult. The German conclusion was straightforward. British training standards must have declined, prioritizing quantity over the quality that modern warfare demanded. This assessment wasn't merely theoretical prejudice. German military theorists had studied the Boer War extensively, noting how British infantry had struggled against Boer marksmen armed with Mauser rifles. The lessons seemed clear. Precision shooting at range would dominate 20th century battlefields. The German army invested heavily in marksmanship training, establishing comprehensive programs that turned ordinary conscripts into competent sharpshooters. By 1914, German infantry companies possessed soldiers capable of engaging individual targets at 600 meters with reasonable confidence of hits. The British approach to rifle drill appeared to ignore these modern realities. Their soldiers practiced something called the Mad Minute, a frenzied exercise where they attempted to place as many rounds as possible on target within 60 seconds. To German observers, this resembled training for panic rather than combat. Sustained aimed fire required steady nerves and careful shot placement, not desperate volume. When German and British forces inevitably clashed, German commanders expected their disciplined, accurate rifle fire would systematically destroy British units before they could close to the ranges where their volume of fire tactics might prove relevant. The Gewehr 98's reputation reinforced this confidence. It had proven itself in colonial campaigns and earned respect from military professionals worldwide. German soldiers trusted their rifles implicitly, knowing each weapon had been manufactured to exacting standards and test-fired for accuracy. As August 1914 approached, German infantry prepared to demonstrate their rifles and their trainings superiority over British methods they considered antiquated. They were about to receive an education in practical combat effectiveness. The short magazine, Lee-Enfield's design philosophy, diverged fundamentally from continental rifle development, where the Gewehr 98 and other Mauser pattern rifles employed front-locking lugs, bolt mechanisms that locked at the chamber end. The Lee-Enfield used a rear locking system. The bolts locking lugs engaged at the rear of the receiver, not the front. This seemingly minor difference created profound implications for operating speed. A front-locking bolt required the shooter to lift the bolt handle through a significant arc to cam the lugs out of their recesses, then pull the entire bolt rearward. The Lee-Enfield's rear-locking design needed only a short 60-degree bolt lift to unlock, followed by an exceptionally smooth rearward pull. This mechanical elegance translated directly to faster cycle times. British soldiers could work the Lee-Enfield's bolt with minimal disruption to their firing position. The short bolt throw meant less vertical movement of the rifle, keeping sights closer to alignment throughout the cycling process. Experienced riflemen developed an almost flowing motion, bolt up, back, forward, down, fire, that became instinctive through thousands of practice repetitions. The action's smoothness contributed significantly to this speed. Lee-Enfield bolts, when properly maintained, operated with a silky precision that allowed rapid manipulation without requiring excessive force. The magazine system represented another crucial advantage. Most military rifles of the era used 5-round magazines, a capacity military theorists considered adequate for controlled, aimed fire. The Lee-Enfield's designers doubled this to 10 rounds in a detachable box magazine. This wasn't simply about carrying more ammunition between reloads. The larger capacity meant British soldiers could sustain fire through longer engagement sequences without breaking their rhythm. When a German soldier firing a Gewehr 98 had to reload after 5 shots, the British rifleman beside him still had 5 rounds remaining, maintaining continuous fire whilst his opponent fumbled with a stripper clip. The magazine's detachable nature offered tactical flexibility other designs lacked. Whilst British soldiers typically reloaded using 2 5-round stripper clips with the magazine in place, they could swap entire magazines if circumstances demanded. This feature, though rarely exploited in practice, provided options unavailable to soldiers using rifles with fixed internal magazines. The Lee-Enfield's magazine also fared exceptionally reliably, its spring and follower design proven through extensive testing and refinement. The rifle's overall length contributed to handling speed as well. Adopted in 1903, the SMLE measured just over 44 inches, shorter than the Gewehr 98 by nearly 5 inches. This compact length made the weapon easier to maneuver in trenches and confined spaces, though that advantage wouldn't become apparent until trench warfare developed. More immediately relevant, the shorter length meant less mass to move during rapid bolt manipulation, reducing fatigue during sustained fire. British military authorities had embraced these features deliberately. The Enfield factory's designers understood that modern battlefields would demand volume of fire. They'd observed conflicts in South Africa and Manchuria, noting how firefights increasingly occurred at ranges under 500 meters, despite rifles' theoretical capabilities at twice that distance. At combat ranges, a soldier who could place 20 aimed shots downrange in a minute possessed enormous tactical value compared to one managing 12 shots with superior individual accuracy. The Lee-Enfield was engineered specifically for this reality. The rifle's tolerances reflected British manufacturing philosophy as well. Where German rifles were built to extremely tight specifications, ensuring maximum accuracy but sometimes creating reliability issues in field conditions, the Lee-Enfield employed slightly looser tolerances. This made the weapon more forgiving of mud, dust, and imperfect maintenance, while sacrificing only marginal accuracy at ranges beyond practical infantry engagement distances. British designers prioritised a rifle that would function reliably under combat stress over one that excelled on the shooting range. These mechanical advantages meant nothing without trained soldiers to exploit them. British Army musketry training transformed ordinary recruits into rapid-fire specialists through a program that struck foreign observers as borderline obsessive. The standard every soldier was expected to achieve became known simply as the Mad Minute. 60 seconds to place 15 aimed rounds onto a 12-inch bullseye at 300 yards. This wasn't optional proficiency for specialist units. Every infantryman, from fresh recruits to veteran sergeants, was required to demonstrate this capability annually to maintain their marksman classification. Failure meant additional training until the standard was met. The number 15 represented the minimum acceptable performance. Competent soldiers regularly exceeded this, placing 20 or more rounds on target. The truly skilled, men who'd internalized the bolt work technique through years of practice, could achieve rates that seemed physically impossible. Sergeant Major Jesse Wallingford of the Somerset Light Infantry reportedly placed 36 hits on target during a timed test at Bisley in 1908. This wasn't a single anomalous performance. Multiple soldiers documented achieving 30 to 38 rounds per minute under test conditions, with every shot striking within the scoring area. The training methodology behind these achievements was systematic and unforgiving. Recruits began with dry firing exercises, working the bolt thousands of times without ammunition to build muscle memory. Instructors emphasized smooth, flowing movements rather than frantic speed. The bolt action had to become instinctive, thumb naturally finding the bolt knob, hand pulling straight back without unnecessary sideways motion, forward push, seating the round firmly. Only after this foundation was established did live-fire training commence. Range practice followed strict progression. Soldiers started at 200 yards, focusing on maintaining proper form whilst increasing speed gradually. Instructors watched for telltale signs of poor technique, excessive rifle movement between shots, inconsistent breathing rhythm, tense shoulders that would fatigue quickly. Once a soldier could maintain good form whilst achieving 12 aimed shots per minute, the range extended to 300 yards and the pace increased. This distance wasn't arbitrary. British doctrine identified 300 yards as the typical engagement range where infantry combat would be decided. The scoring system reinforced practical combat effectiveness. Shots had to strike a man-sized target. The 12-inch bull represented a torso hit at 300 yards. Near misses counted for nothing. This requirement ensured soldiers weren't simply spraying rounds in the general direction of targets. Each shot needed proper sight alignment, controlled trigger press, and follow-through despite the rapid bolt manipulation. Soldiers learned to acquire sight picture instantly as the bolt closed. Fire the moment alignment was adequate, then work the bolt whilst riding the recoil and reacquiring the next sight picture. The psychological dimension of this training proved as important as the physical skills. Soldiers who could reliably achieve the Mad Minute standard developed enormous confidence in their weapons and their abilities. They knew, not hoped, but knew, they could place aimed fire on target faster than enemies could respond. This confidence translated directly to combat effectiveness. Under fire, when stress degraded performance, soldiers fell back on ingrained skills. Men trained to fire 15 aimed rounds per minute in peacetime could maintain 12 to 13 rounds under combat conditions, rates that still vastly exceeded what German doctrine anticipated. British training also emphasized sustainability. The Mad Minute represented peak capability, but exercises required soldiers to maintain 8 to 10 aimed rounds per minute for extended periods. This recognized that combat didn't consist of single 60-second engagements. Soldiers needed to deliver sustained fire without rapidly exhausting themselves or their ammunition. Proper breathing technique, efficient body positioning, and smooth bolt manipulation all contributed to endurance. The results of this training investment would soon be tested under circumstances far more demanding than any range exercise. The test arrived on the morning of the 23rd of August 1914, along a canal near the Belgian mining town of Mons. The British Expeditionary Force had established defensive positions along the Mons-Condé Canal, a waterway that provided a natural obstacle to German advance. The British had approximately 70,000 men and 300 artillery pieces. Opposing them, the German First Army fielded over 160,000 soldiers backed by 600 guns. German commanders expected to sweep aside what they viewed as a token British presence, clearing the path for their wheel through Belgium into France. German infantry began their assault with the confidence born of superior numbers and recent victories. Their approach followed doctrine, advancing in dense formations that would allow officers to maintain control whilst concentrating firepower once they reached effective rifle range. The massed columns presented impressive displays of military precision, thousands of men moving in coordinated waves toward the canal. German soldiers had been told British forces were negligible, remnants of a colonial army unprepared for continental warfare. They advanced, expecting to brush aside scattered resistance. The reality struck with devastating abruptness. As German formations approached within effective range, British riflemen opened fire. The volume of incoming rounds was staggering. German soldiers advancing across open ground found themselves in a storm of bullets that seemed impossible for the number of defenders they faced. Men fell in clusters, shot through before they could identify targets. Officers shouted contradictory orders, some demanding the advance continue, others calling for troops to seek cover and locate the machine gun positions that must be causing such carnage. But there were no massed machine guns. The British had 2 machine guns per battalion, the same ratio as German units. What German soldiers were experiencing was concentrated rifle fire from the British Expeditionary Force's professional soldiers, men who'd internalized the Mad Minute until rapid-aimed fire became reflexive. Battalions deployed along the canal were placing sustained fire into German formations at rates the attackers simply hadn't conceived possible from bolt-action rifles. Lieutenant Colonel David Campbell of the 9th Lancers observed German infantry attempting to cross the canal at Nimy Bridge. His account describes wave after wave of German soldiers advancing into what he termed an impenetrable wall of lead. The British riflemen defending the bridge maintained such consistent fire that German bodies literally blocked further advance at certain points. German officers, expecting to coordinate rifle fire against scattered British positions, instead found their men pinned down or decimated before they could deploy effectively. German after-action reports from the battle consistently reference machine guns that weren't there. The 1st Battalion of the 75th Infantry Regiment reported being halted by devastating machine gun fire from British positions that possessed, in reality, the standard 2 machine guns for the entire battalion. What they'd encountered was 4 companies of British riflemen, each man capable of firing 15 to 20 aimed rounds per minute. The mathematical reality was overwhelming. A British battalion of roughly 1,000 rifles could theoretically deliver 15,000 rounds per minute if all soldiers fired simultaneously at Mad Minute rates. Even accounting for practical combat conditions reducing this by half, the sheer volume of lead exceeded what massed machine guns could achieve. The psychological impact on German forces proved as significant as the physical casualties. Soldiers who survived the initial assaults described a sense of helplessness, advancing into fire they couldn't suppress or evade. Traditional infantry tactics, maneuver, cover, and return fire, failed against the volume of rounds the British delivered. German units began taking casualties before their own rifles were in effective range, and when they did deploy, their methodical aimed fire couldn't suppress the torrent of bullets streaming from British positions. The technique behind these extraordinary fire rates wasn't mystical. It was biomechanics refined through relentless practice. British instructors had identified every inefficiency in the loading and firing cycle, then developed methods to eliminate wasted motion. The result was a systematic approach that, when properly executed, reduced the time between shots to barely more than what semi-automatic rifles would later achieve. Bolt manipulation began with thumb position. The standard technique placed the shooter's right thumb directly on top of the bolt knob rather than wrapping fingers around it. This positioning allowed the thumb to push the bolt upward and rearward in one smooth motion, using the stronger pushing muscles rather than relying on grip strength. The motion resembled swatting something behind you, natural, fast, economical. The return stroke used the palm to push the bolt forward and down, seating the round and locking the action without requiring the hand to shift grip on the rifle. Body position eliminated unnecessary movement between shots. Shooters maintained a solid prone position with the rifle's butt firmly in the shoulder pocket, left hand supporting the forend, right hand managing both trigger and bolt. The key was keeping the rifle as stable as possible whilst the bolt cycled. Skilled riflemen could work the action so smoothly that the sights barely wandered off target. The moment the bolt locked forward, the sight picture was already adequate for the next shot. This wasn't precision marksmanship in the target shooting sense. It was combat-effective accuracy delivered at impossible speeds. The trigger hand's grip required specific attention. Between shots, the trigger finger remained outside the trigger guard, whilst the hand worked the bolt. This prevented accidental discharges and maintained consistent hand positioning. As the bolt closed and locked, the finger naturally returned to the trigger, finding it by feel rather than visual confirmation. Experienced soldiers could complete this cycle: bolt up, back, forward, down, finger to trigger, fire, in under 2 seconds. Elite shooters managed it in 1.5 seconds, achieving 40 rounds per minute when pressing their maximum capability. Breathing integration separated competent shooters from exceptional ones. The natural respiratory pause, that moment between exhaling and inhaling when the body is still, provided the optimal instant to break the shot. Skilled riflemen timed their bolt manipulation to coincide with their breathing cycle, working the action during the inhale, acquiring sight picture as they exhaled, and firing in the respiratory pause. This rhythm became so ingrained that shooters could maintain it unconsciously during combat stress, their bodies defaulting to trained patterns when conscious thought became difficult. The magazine reload represented the only significant pause in this cycle. When the bolt locked back on an empty chamber after the 10th round, shooters had 2 options. Most commonly, they kept the rifle in the firing position, reached into their ammunition pouch with the right hand, extracted 2 5-round stripper clips, and loaded them sequentially with the magazine still attached to the rifle. The stripper clip system allowed 5 rounds to be thumb-pressed into the magazine in one motion, taking perhaps 3 seconds per clip. The entire reload process, empty chamber to fully loaded rifle, required 10 to 12 seconds for trained soldiers. The alternative method involved dropping the empty magazine and inserting a fresh one. but this was rarely practiced. British soldiers typically carried only 2 or 3 spare magazines, making magazine changes impractical for sustained engagements. The stripper clip reload, though slightly slower than a magazine swap, was the standard tactical procedure because it conserved magazines and matched ammunition resupply logistics. What made this technique truly devastating was its sustainability. Unlike the frantic, energy-draining movements untrained shooters might use attempting rapid fire, the British method was efficient. Soldiers could maintain 12 to 15 aimed rounds per minute for extended periods without exhausting themselves. The smooth, practiced motions required less physical effort than wild, uncontrolled speed. German intelligence officers faced an impossible puzzle after Mons. Their casualty reports documented devastating losses to automatic fire, yet captured British positions revealed far fewer machine guns than the mathematics suggested. Company commanders filed reports describing massed machine gun positions at locations where British defenders had possessed perhaps 2 Vickers guns and several hundred riflemen. The discrepancy was so pronounced that German staff officers initially suspected the British were recovering their machine guns as they withdrew, denying the Germans accurate assessments of enemy automatic weapon strength. The confusion persisted through subsequent engagements. At